Hello, it's been a while. However, I am back with another little haul and some life updates because, as you will see, there's a reason why I'm reading these books. And here we go. So, for work, I am going to be lucky enough to be sent for 2 weeks to Singapore, and then I'm taking another 2 weeks of vacation afterwards to go to Japan. So I figured I would show you the books that I have purchased and or borrowed from the library in order to read a bit more about Singapore, books set in Singapore, the food, all of that good stuff, and then do a second video for the same books that I've had for Japan. Have to say it was a lot easier to find books set in Japan and by Japanese authors, particularly like very popular ones, because they were on the shelves in the bookstores in Paris, whereas the books from Singapore and by Singaporean authors I had to order online or get from my public library at home. So that was a little bit of a shebang. So to start off, the ones that I've already read set in Singapore include 2 mysteries. And I believe that this series is called the Auntie Lee mysteries. And these are extremely fun. They kind of feel like if Miss Marple weren't quite so British and also talked a lot more about food. I was just constantly very hungry while reading these because Auntie Lee actually runs her own restaurant specializing in, I believe it's called Peranakan. One of those things that I've never had to pronounce, and I didn't really know what that meant before reading these books, so that's why I was shocked. So now I have a bunch of different things that I am going to be searching for when I touch down in Singapore. Luckily, I have some colleagues on site who live and work there and have been there for years and years and years, so it'll be really fun to kind of follow them around, get a lay of the land, and because I'll be there for 2 weeks, I'll also have enough time to go explore on my own. Right, so the first 2 in the series by Ovidia Yu. The storygraph are actually called Singaporean Mystery Number 1 and Singaporean Mystery Number 2, so I guess they're not Auntie Lee's mysteries, but we have Auntie Lee's Delights, which is number 1, and Auntie Lee's Deadly Specials, number 2. I was surprised that both stories involved members of the LGBTQ plus community. In a natural way, I would say. It just, I don't know enough about the feeling on the ground, I guess, when it comes to gay or lesbian couples. So I was shocked that we had, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but we had characters who fell under that umbrella in romantic relationships with people of the same sex, and they were involved in both cases. And we got a range of reactions. Auntie Lee's, I think she's a domestic helper, but she's actually just her best friend who helps her solve mysteries and was a nurse in her home country and isn't allowed to practice as a nurse in Singapore. And she's extremely Catholic, so had reservations, we shall say, about the characters who come to Auntie Lee for help, whereas Auntie Lee was a lot more laissez-faire. She doesn't really care as long as people are loved and loved. That's what she puts importance on, which I think is lovely. Just something that kind of took me aback. I didn't know what to expect, and having it present in both books was surprising. The whole series, it feels kind of odd. It feels like you're in the middle of a series and you just get kind of introduced to these characters with like one line of, remember this is who this person is, and it's like, but you've never introduced them to me before. This is the first book in the series. You do pick up on it really quickly, so it's not necessarily a problem. It just struck me as funny. So in the first one, they have a sort of dinner and wine club, and 2 of the members don't show up, and Auntie Lee gets a text from one of them saying, oh, sorry, last minute, like, can't come. And then someone shows up in the middle of the dinner and it's like, I'm looking for this person, and it kicks off this whole search for this person, and are they alive, are they deceased, are they being held for ransom because they're from a very rich family. There's also a close connection between Auntie Lee and her whole cohort and their local police chief. So it was interesting to kind of get a sense of how that works in Singapore, because I know Singapore is considered an extremely safe country. Then we have number 2, in which two someones die at a party that Auntie Lee is catering. And they die by poisoning. And Auntie Lee makes a dish that, if you prepare incorrectly, could poison someone. So there's a whole problem there, very clearly, but while they are shut down, they somehow get caught up in a medical illegal import and transplant plot. So definitely took me to places that I wasn't expecting. So those are the 2 that I've finished, a little bit more in depth because I have actually, you know, finished them. And then for the rest of them, here they are. So I have started with Spider Boys by Ming Cher because it's the one that came in hardcover. So I don't want to have to travel with this one if I don't finish it in time. I'm 70-ish pages into this book, which is 220 pages all told. But the premise for this book and like why it was written actually struck me as very interesting, because the author was born in a slum village in Singapore and has kind of lived this experience, even though this is the novelization of how he grew up. But he began this book as an attempt to explain to his son how he grew up and like where he's from and his past and what he lived through. And he seems like a fascinating kind of guy. He writes only in the English he learned at school, and that which is spoken on the streets of Singapore. And then he also speaks but doesn't read or write Hokkien, Cantonese, Mandarin, Malay, Indonesian, and Vietnamese, and worked in construction in South Vietnam at the height of the war and as a merchant seaman. He has lived in New Zealand since 1977. So this book kind of follows some young boys who are not necessarily the best at staying in school, and they've formed their own kind of betting ring about spiders. So there's these big spiders in Singapore that are apparently extremely combative, and they make them fight in these tournaments in order to, you know, bet, make money, win, become the champion of what's going on. But at the part that I am in the novel, we have an older, more dangerous gang aspect being introduced in the form of an older character who has murdered someone. And there's also a lot, because there's not adult supervision, there's a lot of like risky behaviors in terms of sex, violence, and money that are really hard to read when you remember just how young the characters are. For example, I think our main character is still in middle school, or if he were in school, he would be in middle school. But his assistant, his like best friend, or his girlfriend's younger brother, the lines are not very defined, was just assaulted by someone's grandmother. And it's kind of just brushed over as like, oh yeah, she does that to everyone. She thinks she's still a child. And that's particularly alarming. And I think they said from the age of 7, our main character has been having sex with the girl next door. So there's a lot going on there that is definitely different than what I would want for a child growing up anywhere in the world. I'm trying not to let kind of how sad that makes me take away from the story and the very immersive way it's being told, because I think there's still a lot of, not like entertainment, I don't want to make it seem so heavy as like to say value, but there's a lot in this story that is compelling and that I am looking forward to reading more of. It's just also equally upsetting because no one in the book is looking at it from the lens of like, oh, these kids deserve better. It's just, oh, this is what it's like to be a kid in these slum villages at this time period. Then from a writing perspective, like I said, it's very immersive because it's a particular snapshot of a moment in time and the language and the ways of speaking that were used. So I don't think that I'll hear the same cadence when I'm in Singapore, but for example, the one thing that I do recognize from having colleagues who are working in Singapore is that a lot of the time people will end a sentence with la. I don't necessarily know what it means. I think it's just kind of like an inflection or a way of saying, okay, like the sentence is finished, and having that written and being able to recognize it, it was just a cool like touch of like, okay, I know what this means and I know what's going on. I kind of feel where we are. So it definitely is very, like, you know where you are, what moment in time, and the people are very real. Someone in the back says, at times I was reminded of S.E. Hinton, which I could definitely see. I think if you're looking for something that is, like I said, a kind of capsule of this time in Singaporean history and that feels very raw, this is very compelling. Next up, we have a book that I believe is actually around the same length as the one that I just showed you. A little bit shorter, it's 170 pages, but classified as a novella. So this is a romance novel by Catherine Lim. It's called A Leap of Love because it's based on the idea that every 4 years on the 29th of February, so in a leap year, it is a Western tradition that a woman is allowed to propose to a man. And our main character, Leanne, is extremely romantic. In her mind, there's only one person. She hasn't met him yet, but her one person is out there and she's gonna find him, and the first time she sees him, she's gonna know that it's him. Which sometimes I have problems with as someone who does enjoy romance, but with a lot of caveats. But so far, the way that it's written is whimsical and feels almost like it's in a fantasy genre. I don't quite know how to explain it. But we have our main character who's very beautiful, and people left, right, and center seem to be falling for her charms. Her mom is despairing because soon she's gonna be 25, and then like who will take her then? So that's where we are. And I haven't gotten to the point where she meets this fated love, but apparently his name is Jeremy, and they see each other on the 29th of February, and she kind of catches his attention and his imagination going forward because she takes advantage of this tradition in order to propose to him the first time they've ever met. And then apparently fate, ever mischievous, intervenes with her tricks, determined that love's path should never be smooth. She takes the lovers on an alarmingly bumpy roller coaster ride over the years as each leap year comes and goes, leaving them by turns ecstatic and despondent, hopeful and despairing. But in the end, fate is no match for the enduring power and ferocious tenacity of love. So again, I've only read a chapter so far, and I really enjoy the style in which it's written, even though the broad strokes of what I've seen kind of make me a little nervous when it comes to there's only one person for each person. main character who is far too beautiful for anyone around her, and a mother who thinks that 25 is when you are an old maid. So we'll have to see. I do have some red flags, but I'm definitely looking forward to sinking my teeth into this one. And it's more of a modern Singapore, so kind of the Singapore that I will be seeing and the Singapore that I saw in Auntie Lee Mysteries, and a very different Singapore than Spider Boys. Then this one might be one that I hold on to until I come back and continue my séjour. Can you use that in English? Continue my feeling of being in Asia for longer, because this is the thickest of the ones that I received, and I believe that this is a family history kind of historic novel. And it's A Different Sky, 3 Families, Many Histories, One Country to Make Their Own by Meira Chand. So it starts in Singapore in 1927, following 3 characters from very different backgrounds. We have a woman who wants to free herself from the traditions of a famous Chinese dynasty, a Eurasian individual who is not necessarily pleased to be under the control of colonial Britain, and someone who's fresh off the boat from India, looking to become a successful businessman. Then throughout the years pass, the Second World War passes, and each character is kind of thrown together in different and unexpected ways. Like I said, or like I have said in the past, historical fiction isn't always my favorite thing. Usually I like it best when it's mixed with something else. So this one's at the bottom of my pile. Next up we have Kappa Quartet, which I just really love the cover of this one. There's something about it that really, I don't know, just strikes my fancy. So this is also kind of a mix between the 2 countries where I'm going, because a Kappa is a Japanese demon, I believe. Right, so this follows Kevin, who I believe is a Singaporean main character, who is spending the holiday in Tokyo. So I will be following in Kevin's footsteps as I go from Singapore, where I'm going to be working, to Tokyo, where I'm going to be holidaying. And he meets Mr. 5, who is the enigmatic Kappa, river demon, who wants nothing more than the souls of humans. And then we have 8 different sections within the book itself where there are rippling effects from this encounter and how it affects the people around them and Kevin himself. And then the end of the blurb says, a splendidly original novel that asks what it means to be in possession of something nobody has seen before and what it means to be human. So that is the Kappa Quartet by Daryl, is that Quillen or Keelan? Yeah. And then these next 2 are ones that I think are most well known of the pile that I have just shown you. So I'll start with Ponte by Charlene Teo. And this one I believe was on some of the most anticipated books of lists for its year of publication. And from what I've seen just written about it online, it really captures that sense of the way that Singapore keeps rebuilding itself and remaking itself. It's such a small country, city area, but it is undergoing immense and extremely rapid changes non-stop, it seems. So I have a friend, for example, who says when she goes back to Singapore after having grown up there, that her kind of landmarks from when she was a kid are no longer the same, and that nothing really looks the way that she remembers, which must be a really odd experience. And I think this novel, from what I've seen in reviews and from what I've heard about people speaking about it, captures that sense of like, what is home if home is constantly changing? It's that idea of if a boat is taken apart and put back together with every part switched out, is it still the same boat at the end? That's really paraphrased, but I hope you know what I mean. So this one takes place both in 2003 and 17 years later, so 2020. This is definitely the most current of the novels that I have read or will be reading in order to kind of get a sense of, I guess not really like the history of the place, but like the feeling of Singapore. And this follows both that kind of intense, unique friendship you can have when you're a teenager with Sue and Circe, who have this best friendship, and for one of them it offers the escape from their kind of glamorous or post-glamorous actress of a mother, and for the other it seems like it's more of a way to get closer to this actress that she maybe knew of before becoming friends even with her daughter. And then 17 years later, the two are no longer in contact, and there's a project that comes up at work, which is a remake of the cult 70s horror film series Ponte, the name of the book itself, which was the same series that defined this actress' mother's short-lived film career. I think it goes kind of back and forth between the two to reveal the secrets that maybe have been haunting her 17 years later. And this is also a pretty short one, I believe, at under 300 pages. And again, it's just absolutely stunning. So I am really excited to read this one. This one might be coming with me. I think if I had to pick, I would pick Kappa, Quartet, and Ponte to come with me, with possibly this next one if I can't read it before I go. And this last one that I have on this pile for today is called How We Disappeared by Jing Lee. And it has a blurb by Charlene Teo, so the author that we were just speaking of with Ponte. And this one is again a kind of connection between Japan and Singapore and the history that links the two. I didn't learn a lot about Asian history growing up in the US, so I've been trying to kind of fill in my gaps since then with my reading choices, particularly in nonfiction. But it is going to be interesting to see the effect, especially of World War II, in the Asian countries that I am going to be reading about in this next bit of time before and during my trip to Asia. So this one is going to take place in 1942. And it says, as Japanese troops sweep down Malaysia and into Singapore, a village is ransacked. Only 3 survivors remain, one of them a tiny child. In a neighboring village, 17-year-old Wang Yi is bundled into the back of a troop carrier and shipped off to a Japanese military brothel. In the year 2000, her mind is still haunted by her experiences there, but she has long been silent about her memories of the time. It takes 12-year-old Kevin and the mumbled confession he overhears from his ailing grandmother to set in motion a journey into the unknown to discover the truth. Weaving together 2 timelines and 2 life-changing secrets, How We Disappeared is an evocative, profoundly moving, and utterly dazzling novel heralding the arrival of a thrilling new literary star. So again, this is one that I saw spoken about more on the internet when I was doing a kind of bit of research to figure out what books I'd be reading and which ones I would be taking with me. And I believe that these women who were kidnapped into sexual slavery were called comfort women, and at the time they were obviously treated very poorly by Japanese militants, by the army, by the people who were invading. And after the war they actually had this sense of outcast, of not being welcomed back into the community. Not necessarily that they colluded with the soldiers, but definitely the sense that they were marked and different and couldn't necessarily come back into the community the way that they were before they were kidnapped. So that's definitely something that's very heavy, and again, like the New York Times says, heartbreaking. So I know that this is going to mess with my heart as I'm reading it, and hopefully, again, not a big fan of historical fiction, but this is a part of history that I don't know much about, so hopefully that will make it more of a, not interesting, because of course it's interesting, but will hold my interest a bit more and say, you know, fill in the gaps of like, this is what you've been reading in nonfiction. Here's the kind of personal lived experience of imagined characters, but still more live than some of the stories that I might stumble across in a nonfiction book. Okay, so I've been babbling for quite a bit of time now, and that's kind of all I have to say about the books that I'm going to be reading before going and while I'm in Singapore. If you have any other suggestions about books set in Singapore or by Singaporean authors, I would love to hear them in the comments down below. Because we have colleagues there, it is quite possible that I'll go back in the future. This is the first time I'll be going to Asia, and I could not be more excited, as you might have guessed by the fact that I went out and just bought a bunch of books in order to kind of start getting excited early and hopefully keep the excitement going even after I've returned to France. So, like I said, if you have any suggestions, leave them down below. And that goes for books that I can read after the fact, or any kind of thoughts you have about my travels, if you know any cool bookstores that I should go to, or other fun things that I should be checking out. Fun, fascinating, interesting, whatever the case may be, I am all ears. So thank you so much for watching. If you've watched all the way to here, thank you. That's incredible. And I will see you very shortly because, like I said, I have another video coming with books set in Japan and or by Japanese authors. So thank you so much. If you liked it, please subscribe, hit like, all those kind of things that YouTubers are supposed to tell you to do. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!